Well, oh my goodness. Folks, we're in a brand new series called Family Matters. It has nothing to do with the television program. It's a broad, very practical subject. And frankly, it's a little difficult to sort of rein in, but we have 4 or 5 topics that we're going to address very specifically during this season. Realizing, and let me encourage those of you who are here for the first time. My name is Dan. I'm the old guy here, and they let me hang around a little bit. But we're all going to feel a little guilt during this series. Now, again, those of you who are visiting for the first time say, this is a great church. We come, we just feel guilty. I mean, when we come out of there, I didn't really come to feel more guilty, but we're all going to feel some of that. And not everything is going to relate to all of us. But something will grab some of us along the way. And today the issue is parents and kids who are still at home, who are not yet adults. I guess I got to clarify that. Parents and kids who are not yet adults. Recognizing that that's a very specific element. In fact, because I was given that topic, I went to our kids and I said, I need some help. Because my experience is a long time ago. And not only that, but I almost feel like God messed it up when he designed the family and designed parenting, because you start off knowing nothing. You can think you know something, you watch some videos, you took some classes, you know nothing. When we brought our firstborn home, Rachel, we're living in a little trailer in Indiana, northern Indiana. It was a wintry day after she'd been in the hospital along with Lee for 2 or 3 days. That's the way we used to do it. And we brought her home, and it's just the 3 of us in the trailer, and I literally am shaking. What did we do? Now, I know what we did, but nonetheless, and we knew nothing. So you take these and kids, students, you are here to help adults grow. You're here to help parents grow. I mean, you watch these kids walking down the aisle at a wedding, and you think, they have no clue. They have no clue. And then God sends, as a grace gift, he sends you kids into those families, and they have to grow. So in that vein, I had to seek out our kids' counsel and input along the way, and Lee as well. But the one thing I learned is this. The one thing, parents, you need to do for your kids is to go to parent-teacher conferences this week. I think they're this week in Muscatine, maybe, some of the schools anyway. Go to parent-teacher conferences. I was never so frightened in my life as when mom and dad would come home from the parent-teacher conference thinking, what did the teacher tell them about my behavior outside of the home? Sometimes I deserved to be nervous, and then there were other times when it went okay. I just sort of say, and I don't care whether you've got kids, grandkids, great-grandkids, nieces, nephews, parents, we're all struggling a bit in this area of life. We may be exhausted. Those of you who are in the middle of it, and again, I got to go back and finish my thought. I wish God had given us the experience of parenthood before we started having kids. Because by the time we have the experience, it's over. It's like it's reversed. So we're here to help each other along the way, and recognizing that we may be exhausted, we may be frustrated, and there's almost no part of society which supports the family. And let me tell you, parents nowadays have new issues to face. whether it's technology, whether it's social media, whether it is the whole issue of screen time or identity or safety. And sometimes we feel like we're going it alone. So we're going to do this a little differently today. We're going to read several scripture passages, and within these scripture passages are a lot of truths about family. Kids, parents, parents, kids. And out of them, we're going to draw some sort of practical lists about one list has to do with what kids are not. And the other list, what do kids need most from parents, okay? And they're kind of practical, and to try to find all the Bible verses that speak to it. We've got illustrations of bad families. We've got illustrations of good families in the Bible. We've got illustrations of poor, father-son relationships. We have illustrations of poor mother-son relationships and so on, all through the scriptures. But I want to take a look at these passages. Take your Bibles. If you don't have a Bible, guest servants have got some here. So raise your hand, would you? And we're going to go to Deuteronomy chapter 6. Deuteronomy chapter 6. Now, Deuteronomy is probably not a book you have studied. It is the 5th book of the Bible. So you start with Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, okay? Deuteronomy just means the second law. And Moses, just before the people are ready to enter back into the promised land after they've been in Egypt for 400 years, they've been on a journey which lasted 40 years in the wilderness. They're stuck in the wilderness because of their disobedience, because of their sin. Thousands and thousands died, hundreds and hundreds died every day. And now they're ready to enter that promised land, and Moses is about ready to die. He's 120 years old, and he gathers everybody together, and he gives 4 long messages in the book of Deuteronomy. And he reviews the rules. He reviews God's boundaries, his top 10, the commandments. And in Deuteronomy 5, you have just a reiteration of God's top 10. Now, they had a copy of them. The copy was actually in the Ark of the Covenant being carried along as a part of their worship, but Moses needed to remind them of the value of these commands. And when he gave those commands, he said this. This is Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 4. Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 4. Hear, O Israel. The first word is the word Shema. And it's interesting that when you go to Israel, there's kind of like the first letter of Shema looks like a W, okay, in Hebrew. And you'll see it on every doorway. And when you go into the door, into the home, you slap that W, okay? And that's always a dirty spot in the door frame of the house, always. Here's why. Let's keep going. I'm easily distracted. Those of you who are visiting, you know that happens all the time. Hear, O Israel, verse 4, the Lord our God, the Lord is one Lord. The Lord is one, I'm sorry. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. That's pretty much everything. These commandments, the 10 commandments that I give you today, are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. It is the job of parents to impress on our children God's top 10. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads and write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. There it is. Write them on the door frames of your house. And so they just shortened it to the Shema here. And that's why they sort of slap it as a bit of a good luck symbol. And what Moses is saying here is, if he were to contemporize it, he would say, make these commandments your screensaver. Put them as a note on your mirror, something you will look at every day. I wonder, and I'll bet some of these students can do this, How about making one of the 10 Commandments your ringtone? Thou shalt not lie. Every time the phone rings, Mama's watching me, Mama's in the room, we better be careful. Thou shalt not, or whatever it is, thou shalt not steal. Now, let's go to the next book, Deuteronomy, Joshua. Joshua 24. So now we've just jumped to the end of life for another Jewish leader. His name, Joshua. He succeeded Moses. They have come into the land. They have conquered the land mostly. And Joshua is about to die. So at the end of his life, Joshua 24, this is the last chapter in the book. Look at verses 14 and 15. Joshua says to the whole community, he says, now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your forefathers worshiped beyond the river and in Egypt and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable for you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your forefathers served beyond the river or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you're living. But as for me and my house, we will serve the what? The Lord. Joshua, it wasn't a majority vote. Joshua provided leadership in his home. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. There's a family dynamic there. Guys, particularly. Dads, parents. Now, I turn to the Psalms. That's in the middle of pretty much the middle of your Bible. Many, many verses having to do with parenting and children and the relationship. Psalm 127, context. The Jewish people usually went to Jerusalem for the major worship events. Day of Atonement, the Feast of Tabernacles, which is actually the events that took place in Israel, started on the last day of Sukkot, which is the word for tabernacles or booths. And they would go to Jerusalem for these feast days, and Jerusalem is kind of on a hill in the middle of Jerusalem, and so pretty much anybody coming from any direction has to climb the hill. Well, when you're climbing a hill, it's good to sing a song or do a chant or something along the way just to sort of make the trip a little bit easier, and perhaps you can learn something in the process. So they came up with these songs of ascents. And we're not talking about coins, we're talking about songs of ascending. As we go up the mountain toward Jerusalem, we sing these songs. And there are two of them that I want us, we're not going to sing them because I don't know the notes. Maybe Troy could come up with some notes for it. But nonetheless, we're going to chant them, or we're going to read them, okay? And there's Psalm 127 and 128. Now, I want you to imagine that we are out there on that 5K run, coming back out of the Mad Creek Green Belt, or whatever it's called, coming up that hill on Old 38, for you old-timers who remember where Old 38 was. And we're coming up that hill, and we're chanting a song along the way, and here's what we're saying. And these words are getting ingrained in our heads because we learned them when we were kids. I wonder, when Mary and Joseph and Jesus went to the temple, when Jesus was, 12? Did he chant these psalms? I bet so. Everybody did them. Okay, so let's do them out loud together off the screen. Okay, so we all got the same. If you all read your own translation, it'll be a mess. So let's just do this one off the screen together. Okay, ready? Here we go. Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain. In vain you rise early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat, for he grants sleep to those he loves. Children are a heritage from the Lord, offering a reward from him. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are children born in one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They will not be put to shame when they contend with their opponents in court. Now, we're still moving up the hill. Psalm 128, next verse. Same as the first, could be better, gonna be worse. All right, here we go, together. Blessed are all who fear the Lord, who walk in obedience to him. You will eat the fruit of your labor. Blessings and prosperity will be yours. Your wife will be like a fruitful vine within your house. Your children will be like olive shoots around your table. Yes, this will be the blessing for the man who fears the Lord. May the Lord bless you from Zion. May you see the prosperity of Jerusalem all the days of your life. May you live to see your children's children. Peace be on Israel. Yeah, and we made it. Now, did you think of all the metaphors in there about parents and kids? You know, just a variety within those texts. Arrows. You have shoots around like olive shoots. One more passage. Ephesians chapter 6. We'll put this on the screen. You can go there if you want. I hate this verse. Sorry, Paul, but I hate this verse. Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4. In a section where the Apostle Paul has taught theology for 3 chapters, then he says, let me tell you how it works in life. Here's how it works in your marriage. Here's how it works between parents and kids. Here's how it works at work. Don't read this out loud. I don't want it any louder than it already is. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Dads, and I don't know why, it seems like when I was a kid on Father's Day, we always came back to this verse. But dads, we know how to push their buttons, don't we? And we might use teasing, we might use ruthless criticism, nagging, overprotection, neglect, just a variety of things. Bible says, don't exasperate your kids. Don't make them angry. Don't make them resentful or provoke them. Now, with that biblical basis in mind and sort of a foundation, let me give you a bit of a random list of what kids are not. Kids are not icons. And what I mean by that is they're not objects of worship. In fact, even the family in our world has become an object of worship. But how we use our resources, how we use our schedule, will tell you what you worship, what I worship. Just a few weeks ago, our son-in-law, very much involved with sports throughout his life and still to this day, as he spoke to his congregation, chided them a bit, not a bit, quite a bit, about these weekend tournaments and how much it's easy for families to get drawn into saying, hey, listen, I'm going to make life revolve around my kids. I'm going to make life revolve around their schedule, around their interests, around their friends. And it'd be nice if we could have both, but it just doesn't seem like in our culture you can have both. It's either like worship with other Christian believers or tournaments. And we've all been engaged with that somehow, and we all wrestle with that. And once, if I'm teaching my kid that life revolves around them, I have just set them up for divorce. Because when they get married, they're going to realize life does not revolve around me. There's another person in this house. And then like when we brought home Rachel, it's like now there's a third. Now the attention I get is limited. You know, I can't figure out the fractions, but nonetheless. Kids are not objects to be worshiped. Number two, kids are not clones. I didn't say cyclones. I want them all to be cyclones, but nonetheless, they're, hey, everybody won this weekend, right? So, I mean, it's good. It's clones. They're not extensions of ourselves. I mean, we want kids to have all the stuff and the experiences that we didn't get, and we want kids to be experientially rich, but they end up being relationally poor. And kids are not here to preserve our name. They're not here to preserve our memory. It's not what kids are. Number three, kids are not glue. Kids are not glue. In fact, in my experience, kids tend to drive marriages apart. They put additional pressure on a marriage. I mean, have you ever had, I can't remember a time when this was actually said in our home, but it probably was at some point, where one of our kids would have said, in a moment of anger, I didn't ask to come into this family. In other words, I'm here against my will. I've got a great answer. You know, honey, if you had asked, we would have said no. Fourth, kids are not eternal dependents. I mean, you can create dependency. My kids need me. You know, I'm their best friend. They share everything with me. I share everything with them. You know, if we create dependence, then that dependence is paralyzing, and when it comes time to release them, it's traumatic. Because we lose part of our identity when they leave. Grew up on a farm, great farm stories. We raised a lot of hogs. I love pork chops. We raised a lot of hogs. And we raised them we had sows and raised them from birth, gilts, raised them from birth. The most traumatic day on the life of the farm had nothing to do with harvest, had nothing to do with planting. It had to do with the day we weaned the little baby pigs. We took them away from that 12-place dinner table. Those of you who need an explanation, talk to me afterwards, all right? And the night was filled with screaming from all directions. If you've been there, you know what we're talking about. Our goal is to transfer freedom and responsibility, and our daughter Holly said, you know, one of the things that kids need from parents is to enable them to become functioning adults. Functioning adults. Second question and list. What do kids need most from parents? What do kids need most from parents? And some of these are just extremely basic. I want to start off with this one. We need to pass on a living faith, a living faith. We need to introduce them to Jesus. I love it. We've got rooms in Sunday school and in Awana, chaos, filled with kids who are being introduced to Jesus. But ultimately that job is yours, Mom and Dad. Son Andy said, Dad, I think there's just two things we need to make sure our kids realize. Number one, they need to be loved unconditionally, not with fun and games and happiness, but God's love, which includes a truth factor. It always needs to happen in the context of truth, because some love stuff is not fun. It's not fun. And then it's good for us as a family to exemplify the gospel, to remind our kids that we too are broken, we are sinners. When I was talking to our kids, that came up with regard to my parenting. Dad, you weren't real clear about the fact that you too are a sinner. That was a failure of mine. I still struggle with it. I'm right. I'm right. You know what I'm saying here. Some of you do. Others of you are just hiding your laughter. You understand. I don't want to let people know, see the scars, see the hurt, see the sin in my life. And so as parents, and as Andy and I were talking about that, just reminding our kids that we too are broken and we make mistakes and we sin and we need confession and we need conviction and we need forgiving. We want to ask forgiveness. And we need to be forgiven. And sometimes that forgiveness comes with consequences. It isn't just like, okay, we'll forget it all. It's over with. No, sometimes there are consequences. And it doesn't involve what's commonly known as, sort of unconditional approval these days. I just approve you unconditionally. I approve your situation. I approve your choices unconditionally. You can't do that. You can't do that. You cannot do that as parents. A word, I know that here we have several single parents. And even if you're married and your spouse is there, you might be single spiritually. And I also realize that there are families here where you share kids with another family. And you say, I don't have them 24/7. I can't. Listen, I'm not in that world and I don't understand it well. I really don't understand it well. But that's why we're here. One of these weeks, I think maybe one of the topics is being a father to the fatherless. Second, kids need most from parents for them to provide a refuge, a retreat, a place for security and emotional stability and peace. Provide a safe home and family where you can go out into the world and you can come back and be protected and comforted, where there's truth all the time. And parents, when your kid comes home and reveals to you that they're actually dabbling in stuff that you struggled with when you were that age, don't freak out. Give them room to talk. And then you got to respond. Third, prime education. That's what parents do. Provide the prime education. That's where kids learn first. Teach them how to live in the world, how to deal with the things in the world. What happens when someone dies? What happens when they screw up and they need to make things right? What happens when they have a difficult teacher or a coach? Or what happens when they're in conflict with a friend? And I really believe that you need, if you can't provide, if these don't happen naturally, you need to provide difficult circumstances for them to be in while they're still at home. Because if you've protected them in whatever life it is and whatever kind of walls you've built up along the way, and then they leave and go to college and they're in the so-called real world, and if that's the first time they're dealing with contrary views of life and values and attacks upon faith, it could be too late. Fourth, time alone with them. Oh, by the way, on the prime education thing, there's something I did that I don't know if it was useful or not, but we made a commitment, Lee and I made a commitment that we're going to touch our kids kindly every day. Now it changes. I guarantee you it changes. But you need to just touch them kindly every day. It turns out that most of the time everybody leave kind of at the same time, and so we had this group prayer, and I know they hated it. They hated it. Dad, no, not today, not in front of the bus. No, but there's some things that they need to learn are going to be tough, but later on they'll appreciate it. Time alone with them. Time alone with them. That was the next item on the list. For us, it was the absolute worst time of the day. Okay, kids, time for bed. Yes, the kids are going to bed. The greatest time of the day is after the kids are bed, and we've got maybe another 45 minutes before we're out. We're exhausted. Turns out that's exactly when they want to talk. They were conniving. They knew that's one way we can stay awake if we keep asking questions about the Bible, whatever it might be. Direction, that's the next word. Direction. We need to provide direction. There are some choices you need to make for your kids, and they may not be happy with you about them, but these are things that are good for them in the future. Rachel gave a little list. She said, drinking milk, detasseling. We detassel. I grew up on a farm. I didn't know what detasseling was till we moved to Muscatine and had the delightful experience of going out into the hot field, pulling, the tassel out of the corn one at a time. Things like splitting wood or visiting nursing homes. We did that. Or bringing home any guy I wanted to date to meet my parents first. And there's a bat in the corner, a big bat, baseball bat. We're talking baseball bat. That's a trick somebody taught me once. Or putting my hard-earned babysitting money into my tithe envelope. I whined and fought about every one of those things, but my parents stood their ground most of the time, and I benefited. Why? Because as parents, we're long-term investors. I hate this. I just hate this. Discipline. Read through Proverbs. There's a verse in about every chapter about the rod. Folks, words don't always work. Now, honey, let's sit down and talk about this. No, sometimes there need to be consequences that hurt. And sometimes those hurting consequences have to do with money. Sometimes they have to do with toys. Sometimes they have to do with pain, physical pain. You know what the New Testament calls it? Pruning. Pruning. Think that's delightful? Identity, that's the next word. Identity, we'll cover that on a later weekend. And then finally, love your spouse. Love your spouse. Your kids need to see that your priority is your marriage, not the kids. A final word. You can do everything that you have learned in every conference, every seminar, every book that you've read along the way. And you try to figure out what worked and what didn't work. And you know what? We can't always tell what works and what doesn't work. And we can put into practice all the things we know from the Bible, or all the things we know from Deuteronomy 6 or Joshua 24 or Psalm 127, 28 or Ephesians chapter 6 and whatever other passages there may be. Again, all the way through the book of Proverbs. It's just full of stuff about parents and kids. We can do all the right things as far as we're concerned. But how our kids turn out is still a matter of the grace of God. I want you to look at the last two verses of the Old Testament. You probably haven't read them recently. They're found in the book of Malachi. And at the very end, the prophet Malachi says this about the nature of the end of time and the day of the Lord. I think we've got those for the screen. Here we go. God says through the prophet, he says, and he's talking about the end. The end. Is this going to get any better? I'm not particularly a feeler, but I feel like the family is under so much attack these days. And it's just getting worse all the time. I'm a grandparent. I'm getting crotchety. So that's how it works, okay? This is the way it ends. I'll send the prophet Elijah to you before that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes, before it comes. And then verse 6. And he will turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the hearts of the children to their parents. And then there's kind of a P.S. Or else I'll come and strike the land with total destruction. Oh, is this going to happen? And God will do it. In his time, in his way. Would you stand and we're going to pray.